Whew. Hi there. This is Noveljutsu, and I'm your host, Raelyn. I promised we'd dive deeper into the minutiae of creating a new world for your characters to inhabit, and today's episode is going to be the first splash. I will be doing an overview of things you may want to consider, but I won't be diving too deep into the nitty-gritty science of it all. I'm not going to be giving you formulas or anything like that. So if your story depends on making sure the world you designed is completely, flawlessly within the realm of scientific plausibility, use these videos as a springboard to brainstorm some neat ideas before you do more in-depth research on your own. On a related note, much of what I present is going to be focused on how an Earth-like world and universe would function. For any speculative fiction writers out there, no, you don't have to design an Earth-like world, but understanding how Earth works might help you decide the ways in which you want your world to be different, and what consequences those differences might have. Again, use these episodes as a springboard to help you brainstorm ideas for whatever new kind of world you want to make. As a final note before we begin, this was a very frustrating video for me to prepare, so I apologize if that comes across in my tone at all. It's been a long time since I had to study this stuff, so I did a bunch of research on my own to reduce any risk that I'd be spreading lies. I spent a lot of hours reading, compiling notes, organizing those notes, and then I accidentally overwrote the file. Yeah. Contrary to what I'd thought, I hadn't backed up said file, and I was unsuccessful in recovering a previous version of it. So here we go again. Let's start world building a place for your characters to live by talking about the source of all life as we know it. Despite all evidence contained in the crayon doodles of 3-year-olds everywhere, that burning ball of plasma in the sky, or the sun as plebs call it, is not yellow in color. If you look at the sun when it's high in the sky, but please don't, but if you did, it would look closer to its truer white color. When low in the sky, however, the sun can appear any number of shades between yellow, orange, and crimson, but this is due to a phenomenon known as atmospheric scattering. When light from the sun collides with Earth's atmosphere, that light scatters. Our atmosphere is better at scattering wavelengths on the blue, violet, and indigo side of the visible light spectrum, and since white light is a combination of the whole light spectrum, knocking those colors out of the equation leaves us with the light wavelengths on the yellow to red side of the spectrum. But maybe you want to make an atmosphere for your world that's better at knocking out the red side of the spectrum, leaving you with the blue sun. Here on Earth, when atmospheric conditions change, such as when there's a lot of dust or smoke in the air, the sun may look even more vibrantly orange or even red. Summers where I live tend to be sunny and dry, and wildfires are an unfortunate reality, so I'm well familiar with blood-red sunsets. In order to have life as we know it exist, the kind of sun you have is actually very, very important. You see, you can't have a sun that's too big or hot and would give too much radiation for orbiting planets to have liquid water or maintain life. On the other hand, if you have a sun that's too small, any inhabitable planet would have to orbit the sun much closer. No biggie, right? Except that when a planet orbits that close, they tend to become tidally locked, meaning the same side of the planet is always facing the sun, and that just doesn't work for life as we understand it. You also need to have a sun that is in a stable part of its life cycle. Eventually, as our sun ages, it will expand, overtaking the orbits of Mercury and Venus, and making life impossible on Earth. But don't worry, humankind will murder our planet long, long before that ever happens. Just a little something to cheer you up. Currently, our sun is in the most stable part of its life cycle, which, as mentioned, is important. But you also need to have a sun whose stable period is long. Like, really long. Like, many billions of years long. Because one of the things needed for life to flourish on a planet is time. According to current understanding, the earliest signs of any kind of life on Earth are about 4.2 billion years old, which was only a mere few trillion years after Earth had come into existence. It took billions of years for that early life to evolve into anything more complex than microscopic organisms, and human life has only existed for about 200,000 years. This diagram shows about how long humans have been around compared to the history of life on Earth. That's us. That teensy little spot. So profound. All this is to say that unless the main characters in your story are microscopic organisms, or you have an in-world explanation for super fast evolution, without having a sun with a long stable period, life doesn't have the chance to begin and to evolve. But more than simply being in the stable period, our sun is also pretty non-violent. It gets the occasional solar flare or sunspot, which can affect life on Earth, but it's not so violent as to render our struggle for survival a wasted effort. Any world you create with a more violent star than ours will need to have life that's found a way to adapt to the effects of regular solar flares or other attacks from the sun. What about creating a world that has more than one sun? The world of Thra in the Dark Crystal has, I believe, 3 suns. Tatooine famously has 2. But is that just made-up fantasy and sci-fi nonsense from a time when people didn't care about plausibility? Well, not entirely. You can have planets that orbit more than one star. These are called binary stars, and to have this kind of planetary system work, it would probably take the form of a smaller star orbiting a larger star, or of 2 equally sized stars orbiting each other. Any planets would then orbit both stars. Life on such a planet is theoretically possible, and it even brings with it some neat world building to consider, such as eclipses, where one sun blocks the other, temporarily cooling the planet, or sunrises and sunsets where the 2 stars get closer or farther apart each day. Cool. While the earlier episodes in this world-building series will focus more on building the physical aspects of the world, designing creatures, races, social and economic world-building, all that stuff will come later, I wanted to mention that now is a good time to start thinking about how those physical aspects of your world may impact or intertwine with your world's cultures, history, or evolution. A great example of how the sun can affect the history of an invented world comes from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I know. You're super shocked I would bring this up, aren't ya? In the world of Avatar, we know that Firebender's power is affected and strengthened by the sun, and also by comets. In many ways, the power of the Fire Nation itself stems from the sun. In the episode The Library, Team Avatar learns that a total solar eclipse in the Fire Nation's history left the Firebenders temporarily without the ability to bend their element. In a world that includes water, earth, and airbenders whose bending capabilities are not tied to the sun, an eclipse leaves the Fire Nation incredibly vulnerable. While we don't know exactly what happened on that historic day of the eclipse, we do know it was bad for the Fire Nation. You can also use the sun to show differences in culture. If you've played Horizon Zero Dawn, you probably noticed how the sun is a major focus in the Karja people's government, religion, and language. You can barely get 2 sentences out of one of these people without them using an idiom that speaks of the sun, of light, or of the absence of it. Shadow.
May the dawn find you, the day warm you, and the dusk have light to guide your path.
It's really easy to do something like this in a way that comes off as cheesy, and while it worked for me, I could even see people arguing that Horizon Zero Dawn is a little too one-note about this. But when done right, it adds a sense of history and culture. So think about how the world you're building might impact the people who live there and the systems those people create. Now that you know a little more about our sun and have maybe chosen a sun or 2 to be the center of a solar system of your own, what about the other stars in your galaxy? This is one of those things a lot of people skip in world building, which is understandable. If you've got deadlines or more important details to build for your story, stars are less risky to put on the chopping block than other aspects of world building. It certainly isn't necessary to know the name and location of every star in your world. In fact, I would normally advise against spending that much time on this. However, sometimes, as long as you're thoughtful about how you include it and don't go overboard, a simple allusion or 2 to a very specific star in your night sky might add another level of detail to your world. It might help your world feel a little more real, a little more lived in, a little less like a set of wood and glue you designed for the play your characters perform on the page. Think of The Lord of the Rings with the Star of Elendil. Maybe in your story, you have a character going on a long trek through your dangerous fantasy world, and they pray to a star associated with their goddess for protection each night. Or maybe a teen in your sci-fi sees a particular star and instantly misses their dad who's working on a space station out that way. There's still a lot more to a solar system than the sun, so I'm going to save any discussion on Project Noveljutsu for a future video. In the meantime, your challenge for this episode is simply to think about how you might use the sun or stars to make the world building in your novels feel a little more complete. Maybe try writing a short scene. Sci-fi or fantasy writers might try a scene set on a world with 2 suns during an eclipse. Maybe the characters in your romance novel are forced to take shelter from wildfire smoke together as a blood-red sun sets. You know the drill. Links to my website and social media are in the description box below. Anyone who'd prefer to leave a comment on the transcript of this episode instead of here on YouTube is welcome to do so over on my blog. And I will see you in the next video.